We are activating your unique self-discovery one show at a time. The Orchard of Wisdom Self-Discovery podcast are at your fingertips, just waiting to inspire and invite you in discovering just how awesome you really are and how to navigate through life in joy, enrichment, personal abundance, in mind, body, spirit, heart, and soul. All the people we bring you are here to serve you on your journey of life. Do enjoy our next show. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Building Your Business right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy. I'm all the way from Australia. It is Australia now, not New Zealand. Australia is Neville Starick, and we're going to be talking about coaching today. Also talking about sail towards a brighter future. He says, burnout overcome, the reflective practitioner, counseling therapist, adult, third culture kid. I want to know what this third culture kid is all about. He has Cynosure counseling and coaching, which we're going to be talking about today. But, burnout happens to everybody. And, we need that help when we get to burnout of rebuilding, managing ourselves and where we're going from there. And he says, how do you deal with change? Does it depend on whether it's a change you're contemplating or change imposed by circumstances or a change you have chosen? Regardless, you probably know from experience that not all changes are equal and that some are more challenging than others. And as a third culture kid, TCK for short, he has experienced significant change from an early age as the family transition between and within cultures. His background has heightened his awareness not only on the cultural differences, but also on his curiosity about the commonality of human experiences. It has also shaped on how he sees himself and the world. His patterns of response within relationships and systems, and the beliefs and the values that guide his decisions as an adult, and how it tends to navigate the changes that he initiates and encounters in both personal and professional life. And so I always love it when people come from that personal background, because I feel I don't care what kind of business you're in. If your heart isn't in it, you're not in it for the right reason. And if you aren't it, it doesn't matter what your business is, but you must always represent the authenticity of what that business stands for. So the more you know about yourself and the more in tune you are with yourself, the more you can actually represent it. And I think we're sliding away from the old paradigm of a fake exposure. And we're asking people to be more authentic on who they are, why they're doing what they're doing. Is their heart in it? Do they really care? Because that's the person we want to do businesses with, isn't it? Welcome to the show, love.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here.
And of course, early in the morning for you, mid-afternoon here for me, the day before. So very confusing on Monday or Tuesday.
Yes.
I lived in South Africa for 11 and a half years, so much the same kind of lifestyle as Australia. Everybody thinks that Australia is more laid back with life, but it doesn't matter where we are, we all face our problems, don't we?
Yes. Yes. And I mean, the challenges that are faced in various cultures might be a bit unique to the culture, but there are variations of human experience anyway. So it's just kind of like the context certainly has quite an influence on how you approach the problem and how you perceive and work through it. So it's fascinating sort of hearing people from different places how they deal with the challenges that they encounter.
You said a big word there, which is one that I'm big on: perception. And, we're going to perceive it from our culture, from our upbringing, from our ethnicity or authenticity. And somebody may have a totally different perception on something. And it doesn't mean either or wrong or right. It's just a different point of view, isn't it?
It's like we're standing in different positions looking at the same thing. So we're all looking at the same mountain, but we're standing in a different place. And because of where we stand, we are getting a different impression of what it is that we're looking at. And that I find is a useful thing to keep in mind. It's like, there's not a right or wrong necessarily, but there is a sense of like, okay, you're standing in a different place.
And I think the more that we're willing, and I'm a true colors coach, the 4 key personality traits. And I think the more we're willing to hear other people's perceptions, the more round a picture we have over any one thing, right? It's
Yeah.
like, don't shut people down because their perception is different. Open up and learn.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that drew me into the counselling space is because I was finding myself sitting in a space where people were telling me a whole bunch of stuff and giving me perspectives that were challenging mine,
Mm,
and learning how to sit with that, learning how to allow people to have their perspectives, and then trying to find a common ground where we can actually recognise that hey, we may not be talking about things as differently as it appears. We
mm.
might actually have very, very similar positions. We're just starting from a different place.
Speaking kind of quote a different language, which, we can all be speaking English, but, it's just that we're going to articulate things from the language that we know. And,
Yes,
and if we bother to listen, we'll say, well, you may say tomatoes, I say tomatoes, but we're,
yes,
we're we're talking about the same thing. So it's, I think a lot of conflict is people trying to defend what they're saying instead of, yeah, own it, but be open to other points of view.
and I think there's something in there about language being loaded anyway,
Mm,
because we bring to language our own definitions of what we mean, but the other person has their own definitions
mm,
of those terms. And we think we're talking about the same thing, but it turns out that actually there are subtle differences. So I guess it's one of those things about using the curiosity to actually recognize um, what do you mean by this word?
yeah.
This is what I mean by this word. Does that resonate with you? Is that something? Is that what you're intending? And recognizing that again, like we're standing from different positions, we might use a term to describe a particular experience that we've had that may be very different from what somebody else has experienced that they use the same word to describe.
Mm.
So yeah, it's kind of like it's not just the recognition that we're using the same terms, but it's also we have different meanings that we've attached to those terms.
I refer a great deal today that we have become headliners, the one line
Mm.
statement without looking at content. And the content is the explanation, the meaning, the why, and if we're just headlining, we're not getting the whole picture. So we're sensationalizing without understanding.
Like the whole thing of sound bites, it's like I've taken this sound bite and now I've assumed that I know exactly where
Mm,
they're coming from. It's
hmm
like, well, actually, I'm projecting onto that sound bite or that headline all of my experience, not necessarily what the person who created the sound bite or the headline is actually coming from. And that's actually really important to recognize. I know for myself, it's easy to sit there and get hooked in on the sensationalism, but it's like
mm,
there's a whole story behind that.
yeah.
And this sensational headline or soundbite is only the tip of the iceberg. And if I'm not prepared to delve and dig deep to find out exactly what is trying to be communicated, I may head down the completely different path than the person intended who was trying to communicate something.
I think that's a lot of our problem sometimes is that there's a headline about us and we buy into it, all right? And
Mm.
and then we feel misunderstood. Why doesn't anybody understand us? It's because they haven't bothered to look deeper into your content, or maybe you yourself are discombobulated and you don't know where you're at and you're misrepresenting yourself and it's coming up as that's headline, that soundbite.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we get caught in a trap too around like, can I summarize my whole life experience in a very short term? And it's like we're really complex creatures in
Mm,
a lot of ways. It's kind of like words can only take you so far,
yeah,
and even if you had all the time in the world to go and explain who you are and where you're coming from, you would never cover it all. It's one of
right.
the things that I acknowledge when I have new clients coming in and I work with them. It's in that first session with them, I'm usually saying something along the lines of like, I need you to pay attention to what's going on inside of you because no matter how long I work with you, there's always going to be things that I don't
Yeah.
know. about who you are.
Yeah.
And I'm standing on the outside and only seeing what you present. You're seeing a much bigger picture of your life and your life experience than I will ever get from the outside. So it's this whole thing of collaborating with people.
Mm,
Like you're bringing something to this process as much as I'm bringing something to this process. So we're working together to help you to get to where you want to go. And my job is not to sit there and tell you what you have to do or where you need
yeah.
to go or what goes next, but my job is to actually hold the process and to give you a safe space to look at this and be able to work out what you need to do with it.
Yeah.
So, and that's something that's come out of my training there as a counselor is that my job, my expertise is not in the person in front of me. My expertise is in a process, and my job is to adapt the process to the
Hmm.
person who's here, which means that I need to be listening and paying attention instead of slavishly applying a technique or a modality or whatever. And that's really important for me because I don't want somebody to treat me as if I'm just a problem to be fixed.
Right. Right. Exactly. You know, I'm always saying like the reason why I do these podcasts is because so much wonderful information is shared, so much wisdom. But I'm always saying listen, learn, and apply.
Mm.
And you're listening to people, but you're kind of mirroring back sometimes, what they've said without realizing what they've said. And
Yep.
by kind of shedding the light on, you've just said that, what do you mean by that? Now they've got to kind of almost learn why they've said that.
Yep.
It's like, why did I say that? Where is it coming from? Because so much of our life is robotic that we don't
Very much.
realize, the interactiveness.
Yeah, and we often don't make the time to reflect on what's
No.
going on. So it's like we're verbalizing stuff because in the moment that's what it feels like it is. But when we actually spend time and look at it, actually that's probably not accurate. That's probably just a gut response, and there are nuances to this. And I mean, case in point, I had a client recently who I asked the question, I was like, do you ever experience gut instinct? And it was relevant to what was going on for the client. Now, the client interpreted that term in a very different way than I intended, which was interesting for me because
Hmm.
it's I'm talking about like having a sixth sense type of thing, and
Hmm.
that was interesting for me to know because it was like, okay, this fills out another piece of this person's experience, and I didn't get the answer to the question that I asked, so I ended up having to sit there and say, okay, well, by gut instinct, this is what I mean by gut instinct, and the client was sort of like, oh. Oh, well, yeah, I used to have that, but I don't actually pay
Mm.
attention to it anymore, which was also another piece
And
of very
you
thing.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Epiphany
it's
moment, yes.
yeah, and I'm not sure if it was an epiphany moment for the client at that point, but it certainly gave me a window into
Yes,
what their experience was. So
yes.
there's something here. I've used this term, which has led them down this path,
Hmm.
which wasn't where I expected it to go, and I was able to sit there and say, okay, this is what I was interested in. That was interesting and that was useful. And I'm going to store that away and we might come back to that at some point if it's relevant. But it filled out the picture of this person. These are some of the things that they notice that happens for them. And maybe that could be part of their journey as we work together if it's needed.
Mm. I do find that as a society, we've bought into this outside in life, this expectation of who you should be, why you should be, what you should earn, your degrees, your wealth, your this, your that, and everything. And that we're so busy trying to live up to this illusion of
Mm.
what society has dictated us to be that we're not connecting with who we really are and what the gift of who we really are is. And that life
Yes.
is an inside out job. And
Yep.
and that there is more than our brain as an intellect. Our heart, soul, and spirit has an intellect, and our body has an intellect. And we really need to be in tuned with all of it to actually
Yep.
understand the feelings that we're feeling and why they're there.
Yes, and I love that whole idea of like being in tune with all of it because that sort of encapsulates the holistic approach that
Mm,
I like to operate from. It's like we're not just a body, we're
no.
not just a mind, we're not just emotions. These things all exist in an interrelationship, and it's really, really hard to tease them apart in a lot of respects because they have such strong influence
Yeah.
on each other. So, so I'm looking at okay, we can choose a starting point, but recognize that it's going to have a ripple effect in all the other areas.
Hmm.
So, when I first started doing my counselor training, I wasn't quite sure I was clear about that kind of understanding of who the person is, and got really confronted in my training with the realization that I discount a lot of what my body's telling me.
Yes. Mm,
And it's like, and that's possibly a Western culture thing. I'm not really quite sure where that came from, but it was almost like, yeah, let's ignore
yeah.
any pain or discomfort that's going on in the body, and let's not recognize that that might be connected to what I'm
Hmm.
thinking, what I'm feeling. Um, Even though on one level, intuitively, I kind of knew that, hey, they were kind of connected, but somehow I'd managed to split them in my
Hmm.
understanding of what how things work.
Because that's what we've been taught to do.
Exactly, and it's a very Western thing about the
Mm.
compartmentalizing, and I think as a male, we do that extremely well. It's like, okay, this is what my body's doing. This is what my mind is, what my thoughts are. These are the emotions that I really don't want to deal with, so I'm going to shove
Mm.
them away in a box.
Until they
And
want to explode like a jack in the box.
exactly, and they come back and they bite you. So,
Yes.
so for me, a lot of my learning as a therapist was actually recognizing that I need to give space for all aspects of it
Mm.
and allow them all to have their own voice,
Yes.
because they've all got important things to tell us.
Hmm.
Now, just because they're uncomfortable doesn't mean that they're bad or they're wrong or they
Right.
shouldn't be there. The discomfort is actually highlighting something that we need to
Hmm.
look at. And I talk very much, particularly about emotions, but I guess it also applies to the body and the thoughts as well. It's like all of these things are they're not definitive. This is what is. They're giving a
Hmm.
signal to what's going on for us, and what the impact is of our experience on who we are and how we see ourselves, and what and how we choose to respond.
Mm.
So, yeah. So I find at the moment I'm working with a lot of men, and a lot of men are disconnected from their emotions.
Hmm.
And so we're sitting there, I'm having to help them to understand and befriend their emotions. Okay, this is the emotion of sadness, this is the emotion of anger, this is the emotion of jealousy, this is the emotion of this is the emotion of that. We seem to have a lot more words for some of the emotions that people don't want to have than we do for the
Right.
emotions people do want to have. And our society seems to have this very strong bent to sit there and say, we only want to see the happy ones. We only
Right.
want to see the ones that are nice and are pleasant and we enjoy. We don't really want to know about the other ones, and we just sort of hide them away
La la la
and
la la.
yeah, and pretend that they're not there. And if you do show them, then there's something wrong with you.
Right,
And it's
exactly.
like,
Exactly. I always say our emotions are here to indicate how we're
yeah,
reacting to something in the moment.
yes,
Acknowledge the emotion, all right?
yes,
Spend the emotion. Don't
yeah,
become emotional about the
yeah,
emotion, because
yes.
that's where we
And
get caught up in a rabbit hole.
yeah, and the emotions. Somebody had did a little very clever thing with the word emotion. Is that emotion is something there about moving us in some place.
Hmm.
There's emotion involved. It's encouraging us to a particular kind of action.
Yes, spend it.
There's energy that's
Yes.
involved, or sometimes a lack of energy involved.
Mm.
That's that's part of the signal. So paying attention to those kind of things is really, really important, because if you ignore that or if you misinterpret that, you end up going into dysfunctional type of behavior, if you want to use
Yeah,
that term,
right.
and reactions that are not guided by, well, they're coming from a place of I'm just trying to escape what I'm feeling rather than
Hmm.
trying to work out what it is that is going on and why these feelings are here in the first place.
Yeah, people aren't responding, they're reacting.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because sometimes there's such a mix of emotions that are going
Mm.
on, and they tie in, they have different kind of thoughts attached to them and different kind of bodily responses that come out of them, and it can get kind of confusing. So it's just kind of
Well,
like,
I remember a phase in my life where I became very defensive, and
yes,
people would say something, I'll be defending. And I realized later I was defending something I wasn't sure of.
mm,
Right. Now, when I became sure of who, why, and what, then I don't need to defend it. I don't
yeah,
need to say anything because I know it's truth. And if somebody else doesn't see it, bless you, on your
yeah,
way.
yeah.
I don't need to argue about it. But I think that very often when we defend something, it's because we ourselves are confused by it.
Could be that confusion, but it could also be that we have got such a deep-seated experience of this
Mm,
thing. It's so important to us that it's somebody presenting something that challenges that, makes us think, well, that means I have to let it go, and I'd rather hold on to it.
right.
So rather
And
than
it's also
saying,
with the worthiness too.
could be
But
worthiness
yeah.
involved as
Mm,
well. Yeah. So some of it can be around, I'm not actually prepared to see that there might be more to this
mm,
than I've actually experienced to date.
yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, sometimes some of the people that I encountered, and I see this in myself at times, is like, I have had this experience, I've interpreted it in this particular way. And when somebody brings up an alternative way of looking at it that totally challenges how I look at it, then
Mm,
going, I'm now questioning myself, and
yeah,
that feels uncomfortable. So, and so I'm reacting out of that I'm
right.
feeling uncomfortable with the possibility that I might not have as complete a picture as I thought I did.
Which instead of kind of either defending or feeling less than, it
Mm.
could be, oh, there is a different point of view, and be more
Exactly.
inquisitive, more inquiring,
Yeah.
so that you can
And
build on the information rather than trying to
yeah,
defend something.
absolutely, absolutely. And that's where the curiosity comes in,
Mm,
about developing that sense of curiosity. And the strange thing that I found is that I can be curious about something that doesn't have any strong emotional connection, and I can
hmm
be very curious about that. But once it starts getting personal, then the
hmm
curiosity can disappear. So it's just kind of like, how do I maintain that curiosity around the things that seem to be challenging who I am and how I understand things? Um, and how do I then bring that into all of my interactions, not just the ones
Yes.
that are.
That judgment is a huge thing because society loves to judge.
Oh
And
yes,
and along with judges condemning and persecuting and prosecuting, I mean, they go for it. They get very, very enthusiastic instead of
and
compassion and understanding and empathy, which, I
yeah,
would prefer that they went down that road. But I think is if we, the self-judgment, I think is the one that really is a nemesis to ourselves because if we're going to constantly judge ourselves against somebody else's interpretation of what we should be, um, we're always going to be on the defense and we're never going to go in and truly see the essence of who we really are. So,
yeah.
as I said, when you let go of that other people's judgment, it
Mm,
means you've let go of the judgment of yourself because we're never going to be one size that fits all. We're never going to please everybody. Some
mm,
people will get us, some people won't. That is okay.
yeah. And it's not a requirement. We don't For us to be okay. It's not a requirement that everybody likes us or
Exactly.
everybody
Yeah,
agrees
and
with
it
us.
doesn't mean they hate you. It's just that you're not their cup of tea. That's okay.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the way that social media has developed, it's actually increasing this whole sense of like, I need to have your agreement, your
Mm,
buy-in. You need to like everything that I say.
yeah,
You need to be totally on board with me and absolutely 100% supportive of everything. And it's like, that's unrealistic. I mean,
no.
in regular daily life, you encounter people all the time who are
Mm,
coming from a different place, who don't see the things the way that you do, and who don't support the values that you hold. And that doesn't make you bad or them bad. You can still work together.
right.
You can find a
You
common
you
ground.
found a way. Yeah, the common ground. You found a way to interact with each other and actually embrace the differences, as
Hmm.
kind of the
Or
spice of life.
and also to accept that the disagreement that you have
Mm,
doesn't have to be a divisive thing. It's
right.
it's like we can still connect, we can still have things that we agree on, the things that we see eye to eye on, and we can have some healthy discussion about the things that are different. And I think one of the things that we don't do very well at all these days, and I'm not sure when this changed or whether this has always been a human thing, is that we haven't learned how to deal with our differences.
Agree to disagree gracefully.
Yes.
Right.
And to like, okay, you're saying this experience means this, and I'm saying it means that.
Mm,
It doesn't necessarily mean that um, yeah, it doesn't say anything about what's true or not. It's just like
no,
this is just
it's
what
true to your experience.
yeah, it's true to my experience, and this is how I see it. And I don't have to defend that because this is what I've experienced.
Right.
This is what I hold to be valuable and true, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you might not agree with that, um, and we can still connect in some way
It's brought
in
up a
spite.
memory of me being in school where we had a vocational guidance teacher who
Yep.
literally gone from school to university back to school, really no experience of life. And
Yes.
she brought up a topic and she made a statement. And I said, well, I have just experienced that 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen like that. It happened like this. And she said, no, it didn't. And I said, yes, it did. No, you're wrong. And I said, no, I'm not. This was the
Um,
experience. This is what happened. No, it
mm,
didn't. And it ended up she's sending me to the principal's office. And then when the principal and I went in there, she heard both stories. And she said to the teacher, why did you dismiss her experience? Because I'm the teacher and I'm always right.
wow. Yeah.
So the headmistress said to me, you no longer have to attend her classes to
Nice.
me.
Okay.
And I
Hmm.
didn't because,
Hmm.
a teacher is somebody that inspires, but you want to respect. And that
Yes.
for them to say, look, I haven't experienced that or come across that, but tell us more about your experience instead of, I'm the teacher, so therefore
Yeah.
nobody
I
else can
This is an
disagree with
answer.
me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was a huge kind of like a moment for me in life to realize that some people are going to defend, you know, um, on principle that
Yes.
they're right, whether they're wrong or not, because they don't want to look like they're wrong. They're
Yes.
defending their choice, and
Yeah.
it was quite an eye opener, which of course I've come across many times since. But
Mm.
it was really quite eye-opening. But there was a show I was watching last night, and they were talking about the violence amongst kids right now. 6-year-olds shooting their teachers, 13-year-olds stabbing people to death. They came together from social media, and these bunch of 13-year-olds and 6-year-olds just stabbed this guy to death, out of pleasure. And we're seeing it happen. The knife seems to become the thing where people are just randomly stabbing people, and they're all young. They're all teenagers. And it's like, yes, we can blame so much on COVID, but I think what we really need to look at is these kids are not connected. They're not connected to self, they're not connected to the family, they're not connected to a community. And as this guy was pointing out, before social media, even if you were the bully, you were in the same arena all the time. So you
Mm.
had to be held accountable, or there was no way of escaping. You were in that arena. There was no
Yep.
escaping. And with social media, the cyber bullying, it's very easy to do behind the phone or the computer, because
Yep.
there's no accountability, and nobody's going to catch you. And there's a disconnect. And
Yep.
more and more, we need a connection to self, more and more. And
Mm.
to see this kind of disconnect is quite frightening.
Yes, and the recognize that my actions uh, have a ripple effect.
Yeah, have consequences.
Because
Yeah.
the social media stuff, it's very easy to sit there and not
Mm,
see the impact because I'll go and put this thing out and I will have no idea what it does to somebody because I don't see their reaction unless they choose to respond.
hmm
And sometimes people are so hurt they won't. And so the person who made the comment that was hurtful has no idea.
Right,
And so they're getting no feedback,
right.
or they're getting very, very strong feedback, which kind of increases the
Encourages them.
whole
Mm,
divisiveness or the whole sense of combat that's going on. It's like you're my adversary because you have somehow challenged me.
mm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and I find that really interesting. Just sort of segue into some of the cultural experience that I had. I know when I was living in the US, I went through a period of time. I lived in the US. Well, I was born in the US, but I was also went back to the US as an adult and had a few years that I lived in the US. And one of the things that I found really difficult, and it was glaringly obvious to me because I hadn't grown up in the
Mm.
US. I had spent more of my life outside of the US than in the US when I went back as an adult. And one of the things that I found really difficult to work with was just the whole pressure to conform. And
Yes.
it's not unique to the US. I mean, it happens
Mm.
in every group and every culture. It's like we want you to follow our norms, to go
Mm.
through our
Fit in our
um,
box. Yeah.
fit in our boxes and all that kind of stuff. And I watched myself after several years, like my accent changed.
Mm.
I started using terms that were local to where I was at because I got such kickback when I used terms that came from where I had lived.
Yes.
I was finding myself battling this whole pressure to follow the route to I was already university trained, but my university qualification wasn't recognized in the US, which was annoying, and
Mm.
had to go through the whole process of getting that acknowledged and so on. So it's like I had this educational that took a lot to recognize, was
Mm.
kind of discounted to a degree. Um, but it's like the basic life journey that was expected was like you get your university degree, you get a job, you buy a house, you get a
Hmm.
wife, you have
You bite
children,
two kids.
and it was just like, and it was incredibly difficult because I watched so many of the people that I was hanging around with go through that pattern, and I'm sitting there going, do I want that?
Yeah, I know.
But
Yeah.
also feeling at the same time really pressured to
Mm.
engage in that, to buy into it, and watching myself losing pieces of myself in the process.
Mm.
And I mean, it was a catalyst in one respect to leaving the US and returning to Australia, and that was just the realization that there was something here in the US that's going to require me to sacrifice a huge part of who I am in order to fit in, and that's just more that's a price I'm not prepared to pay. But it's also going to make it very difficult to stay here if I make the choice to be authentic to who I am. So that was part of my move to reclaim some part of myself that I felt like I was being forced to let go of the longer I stayed where I was.
Mm.
And that was just an interesting realization for me, which is like, here is this. Social media wasn't that big at that point in time, but I can
Mm.
imagine a similar type of thing kind of goes on. It's like, here we have these bright, shiny pictures of this is the life that you need to have. But people are not asking the question, is that the life that I want to have?
Right.
Is that the life that suits my giftings, my skills, my abilities? Okay, so I may never never become a millionaire.
Mm.
That may not be what's important to me. It may be more important for me to go and have a close knit community of people who know me and who allow me to be what I am, and so on. So I mean, there's just uh, lots of different things that sort of came out of that whole experience. And for me, I mean, you asked about the third culture kit
Mm.
experience. The third culture kit, a third culture kit is essentially a person who has spent some or all of their formative years, so from birth to 18, outside of their country of heritage. So, and that has implications
Mm.
because your lived experience is different from your heritage experience.
Yes.
And and so you're sort of suspended between, this is the country that I know that I'm
Hmm.
technically not a part of, and this is the country that I'm supposed to belong to that is a bit foreign to me. And I don't know it from the perspective of somebody who has grown up in this environment. I mean, so much of our understandings of society comes from our what we absorb in actually
Mm.
being. And as children, we absorb a lot more than we do as adults.
Yes.
As adults, we tend to be a little bit more. we have a clearer sense of what we believe things should be like, and so therefore we can see the differences. Children tend not to discriminate. Okay, here we
Yeah.
go. We
Hmm.
absorb that. This is
Adapt.
how it works, and then we move into another environment, and it's like, oh, well, that doesn't work. So I'll pull this on and pull this on, and let go of
Hmm.
that, and so on. And there can be some big issues there around identity. For me, an additional complication in that my mother's from the US, my father's from Australia, and we lived in a third country. So it's like it wasn't just two cultures I was dealing with; it was three, and I was yeah, it was just this whole sense of like, where do I fit? Where do I belong? And the challenge of that was like, what is it? How do I need to react?
Hmm.
And as children, that whole process of adapting is something that you just do because it's almost a survival mechanism. I'm in this space, I don't have a whole lot of power. I'll just go and do what everybody else is doing. But then comes to a certain point where you lose yourself in doing that. It's like I'm constantly adapting to my environment, but who am I? And
I went through that at 14. I left England with my mum and went to live in South Africa.
yes,
And I had been a very sickly child growing up and very protected. And
mm,
then suddenly I'm in this world
mm,
of South Africa, vastly different. And my mum, who'd been very pearls and tweed and kind of told when my dad died, well, you just got to take up good works. You'll no longer be invited to the parties. You know,
yeah,
all of a sudden, I'm coming home from school one day and seeing somebody, a woman on the back of somebody's motorcycle pull into my house. And I'm like, who the hell is that? And it's my mother with a
mm,
wig on the back of a motorcycle. Never would I have seen anything like that before. And she had
yes,
found herself. She had found who she was and been denied her entire life. And so it was
mm,
really, really good for her, but very confusing for me because
yes,
I was also an odd child. I was a very spiritual child and very intuitively guided. And some part of South Africa I absolutely loved. And it really spoke to me, and other parts didn't. And, you know, especially the
yes,
apartheid, etc., which I had a great show on last week on that. It was it was hard for me to kind of immerse myself into it. And I was there 11 and a half years. And eventually
mm,
I had to leave two things, misogyny and
mm,
apartheid. I couldn't
yeah,
live under those things anymore. And then I came to Canada, but I had lived in the States for 6 months. In 75 and 76, and I kind of related a lot because at that time progressiveness. You know, I felt that I could be more progressive in my thoughts than I could be in South Africa or in England. Um, but it wasn't meant to be for to me to be there. So I came to Canada. I was going to be here a year and then go back to the States. I then met
mm,
my now ex-husband, who is Chinese.
mm,
So my kids are half Chinese and half English,
mm,
but they relate to being Canadian,
yes,
right? And they
yes,
understand their father has these cultural differences and cultural point of views, which they don't buy into.
mm,
And but they seem to have adopted more my point of views or my philosophies, I suppose
mm,
because I was with them more. I don't know.
yeah,
And still
yeah,
with them more connected. But it is interesting because I have that demographic, you know, that whole system
absolutely,
there.
yes.
And I had to leave South Africa because I no longer felt it was my soil.
Mm.
And then I
And
moved to the island here from Vancouver 5 years ago because I couldn't live there anymore. The soil wasn't
yeah,
speaking to me.
isn't it interesting? Yes, this whole thing of like finding home and so on.
Mm,
That's a third culture issue. I mean, I think everybody goes through that stage anyway. Through moving into adulthood, it's like, where is my place? Where
yeah.
do I belong? People who have come from a third culture kid background, I think they experience that to a degree that people who haven't lived the third culture experience don't.
Hmm.
Um, so while there is this whole search for home and where do I belong that all of us live with, I think the third culture kid is kind of like, well, I've lived in lots of different places.
Yeah.
Where exactly is home? And it was interesting. A few years ago, I had one of my LinkedIn connections went and connected me with a TED talk by Pico Iyer, who talks about this whole thing of like, where is home?
Mm,
And he is a fellow that ethnically he is Indian, but he didn't grow up in India. He's lived in many, many different places. And he just talked about like, well, we when you have experience of many, many different
hmm.
types of soil, what home ends up not being a specific geographical place anymore.
It's you.
Yeah. And that was it sparked off for me a whole another level of
Mm,
process my third culture kid experience, because it's like I had encountered this whole thing about home a few years before that, and I thought I'd worked that through, and I had. There was another layer to it though. It
mm,
was just like I needed to look at my experience and how I tried to find home. And it was like I had tried to find home. Firstly, it was defined by where my family was, but then
mm,
when I went to university, my parents relocated from where we had lived for my whole high school years. And suddenly it was like where my parents lived, I had no connection with.
right.
And it's like, um, now home is not where they are. I go to visit them and I'm still connected to them as family, and I still have a good relationship with them, but their life is very separate from mine now. It's
Mm,
like we don't have the shared networks that we used to have when I lived with them. The experiences that I have are quite separate from it, and that was really hard. It was really hard to make that transition, because it's like for my entire childhood and teenagehood, my family had been the only stable thing in my life. So it was just like, okay, to suddenly have the recognition that I am separate from my parents was a big deal. And I mean, everyone goes through that
yeah.
to some degree anyway, but I think it just because family had been that significant and had been the stable part of my life, to suddenly not have that was really, really challenging.
Yeah. I
So
mean, the one that
so
kind of
then
left home,
yeah, so I
and
left
moved
I left
away.
home. I left home and moved away, but then my parents changed things so that
Right.
I couldn't go back.
Right. Yeah. You know, I
I
had that.
couldn't,
There was nowhere to go back to.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, yeah, while I could go and visit my parents and so on, and
Mm,
I was accepted and I was welcomed and all of that, it wasn't my space.
right.
It was,
Exactly.
I was in that
No
space.
familiarity there.
In that space, I was totally, um, how do I describe it? I was totally my parents' child. I was
Mm,
totally my brother's brother. I
hmm.
wasn't me. I was
Yes.
an extension of somebody else, and that
You were an
was
extension
really,
of
really
their
hard.
memory of you,
Yeah, and
not the
also for the
acknowledgement of
people
who
that
you
were
are now. Mm,
and for the people that were in that space at the time that were connecting to my parents and my brothers that had moved to that location, they were only seeing me through those people.
right.
So it was like, okay, they didn't see any of my university life because I
Mm,
wasn't there, and they weren't part of that. They didn't have any sense of personal connection with me, because there wasn't much that was maintained between my visits.
mm,
So, like, okay, so yeah, so the whole process was then, okay, if family's not home, what's next? And it's like, well,
yeah.
university didn't wasn't going to be long term. So it was like I didn't view university as this is where I'm going to make my home.
Mm,
It was then career. But career has its own cultural stuff
yes.
that goes on with that. And it can then obscure lots of the pieces of who you are, because you're being often called in to do a job and not necessarily to be somebody.
Right.
Um, and that was challenging in itself, and realized very quickly that my experience of burnout came out of that, coming out of uni and going into a job thinking I'm going to give myself to this is going to
Yeah.
be home, and it failed.
Hmm.
And it wasn't because I didn't try. It wasn't because there was well, there were challenges in the environment that I went into. So there was an interplay that was going on between what I expected of
Hmm.
a career and what the demands of the environment were. Um, and then I was sort of realizing, okay, so I can't make this home because it's not in my control. It's not something that I can actually deal with. So I thought, well, I'll travel now. I'll go overseas. Surely the grass is greener somewhere else.
Right.
So go overseas and sort of visit lots of places. I lived in the UK, visited places in Europe, and then ended up in the US. And then it was just like, okay, I'm finding that no matter where I go, there's this wall. I don't feel like I actually fit. I feel like I'm on
Right.
the edge on
Mm,
the outside, and
yeah. Where are my roots?
And my roots are somewhere else that the people here don't know. So that
Right.
feels like there's always a part of me that's missing in this space,
Mhm.
or there's a part of me that I can't bring to this space to the degree that I'd like to, or the degree that I feel is warranted. And it's not accepted, it's not welcomed. And I'm not feeling like I can share this because people don't understand.
Yeah.
They haven't got a sense of what it's like to have moved across multiple countries or having lived in this particular place when they've never even left their
Mm.
own region. So, so yeah, so it's like, okay, travel doesn't actually work either. And then it was interesting. I did a full circle and came back to Australia. I left Australia and I didn't think I was ever going to come back. I
Mhm.
was at a stage where I'd had difficult experiences up until my mid 20s from the time that we'd arrived. It's just been difficult. And I was just like, I needed to get away. I
Mhm.
needed to get away and work out who I was, work out what was going on with me, and find out where my place was. And coming back to Australia was a really big deal because I had messages in my head that basically said, once you leave somewhere, you don't go back,
Yes.
which
That's been
was,
me. Always
which
moving
was,
forward.
yeah. So, so coming back, I almost felt like I was challenging a life message, and I came back for postgraduate study, went and did my counselling degree, but also with an awareness. I had encountered the third culture concept before I came back to Australia, and I had a bit of a sense of like, there's going to be a transition that's involved in coming back, and I was much more aware of what was happening in me
Hmm.
and was able to process that. And the counselling degree actually helped because one of the things that we were required to do was to go and do at least 10 sessions of our own counselling, which I did.
Hmm.
And for me, there was a whole bunch of stuff that came up around expectations of myself, the desire to constantly fit in at my own expense, and the grieving around all of the
Mm.
leaving that I'd had to do, that I'd never had an opportunity to be able to um, process.
Hmm.
So here it was, it's like, and the grief seems to be one of the recurring things that happens with the client work that I do, is that we all, loss is a part of a human
Yes.
experience. It's not uncommon, but we tend to associate grief mainly with death.
Yeah.
And death is a particular kind of loss, but it's not the only loss that
No.
we experience.
No.
And so a lot of times people are going through significant losses. They're having these strong emotional reactions to things, and then they're having no idea why it feels like they're not coping, or why it feels like this situation has undone them, whereas they've walked through other things before that haven't.
Yeah.
So they're then questioning themselves a whole lot. I remember very early on in my counselling practice, I had somebody that came in and said, I'm just noticing I'm just angry all the time.
Hmm.
And I don't know where it's coming from. It's like it doesn't seem to fit with anything that's happening. And as we are, and I had just done some training there around the grief process, which had been hugely insightful for me. And I just asked the question, well, what's changed for you recently? And that just opened up
Mm.
this whole series of this happened and this happened and I lost this and I lost this and I had this relationship that was really important to me that isn't there anymore,
Hmm.
and I've got these dreams that I wanted for my family that haven't been realized, and just went on and on and on and on and
Yeah.
on. And I'm just sitting there going, I wonder if the anger is a part of that.
Yeah.
For that client, that was like the
Light bulb.
eye-opening light bulb moment, that it was just like, it's the anger itself is pointing to how much I've lost, and the pain that goes along with that I don't want to be feeling anymore. Mm.
We're not really kind of given permission to have that kind of loss. People expect that when somebody dies, you're allowed to have certain amount of grieving and then they kind of get over it, right? And I've taken many journeys in my life where there's been a great deal of loss. A
Mm.
loss of a marriage, businesses, people in my life, places. Um,
Yep.
and of course losing myself, definitely. And it's like, I still don't feel rooted. I'm about to move again, but closer to
Yes.
my daughter because she's
Yeah.
expecting another baby. So closer to my daughter. It's not my favorite place to go to.
Yep.
It's a totally different type of city, and I love the vibe here. But it's something that a mom and a grandma does, right? And
Yep.
but what I have, I mean, I love living on the island because I love the vibe here. So the vibe will go with me. Um, but I think that we're not kind of given permission to have closure on things. And
Mm.
I would say that there's quite been a number of doors left open for me that were not satisfactorily closed, or
Yep.
or are left open with or closed with regret or
Mm.
sorrow or anything else. And it's just like, well, just get on with life, and we don't allow people to go through that grieving loss.
Yeah.
And I think it does travel with us, and we don't
It
realize what's
has to
weighing
be.
us down.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I highlight with people is that if you're feeling an emotion that seems to be out of proportion to the context in which it's showing up, there's usually a whole bunch of other things
Yeah.
attached to it. And so for me, I mean, I resonate with you talking about like the grieving and the loss. And it's like there were so many things that I had never had the opportunity
Mm,
to say goodbye to. When we left Papua New Guinea when I was a child, I have a vague memory of like I was 9. I have a memory that we did a going away thing with people that were there, and I mean there was this little tradition that went on with everybody who left our area got this golden something that was a representative of the family that you'd kind of take with them. Now I don't know where that is anymore, but yes, I remember that happening. But that was the only thing that marked us going.
mm,
I don't remember as a family us doing any kind of processing around preparing to move up,
hmm
aside from the physical things of packing up. It was I don't remember having conversations once we got to Australia around what we were feeling as we were there and what
hmm
the challenges that we were having. One of the things that I didn't realize until much later when I was doing my counseling degree was the whole change in community.
Yes.
Like you
Lifestyle,
said,
points of view,
well,
everything, foods, everything.
absolutely. I mean, up in Papua New Guinea, everybody knew everybody. We
Mm,
saw each other in multiple contexts. It was like the people that I saw at school, I would often see at church. I would see in social settings. We would engage in lots and lots and lots of different ways. And I came to Australia, and it was like school was here, church was here, and social connections were here, and none of them seemed to know each
connected.
other.
Mm,
And that was really, really hard to get used to. It's just like, okay, it's like I've got 3 different environments that I need to adapt to. Whereas I had been used to, it's like you could
one.
be swimming through all of them, but that wasn't necessarily the case
Have
when
you
I
um
came.
have you read the book Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson?
I have heard of the book, I haven't read it.
I
So yes.
highly recommend it. It's a very quick read. And they also
Yep.
then did it for children. And it's
Yep.
a two men, two mice around abundance of cheese, and one day the cheese is gone. And it's the reaction.
Yep.
The sniffy and scurry, sniff out and scurry around for more cheese, hem and ha. Well, ha is, like I'm going hungry, I've got to do something. So eventually gets going. And hem is give me back my cheese. Who do I have to kill? Who do I have to sue?
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
And it's all around change and how
Yep.
we look at change. And of course, our own personality trait is going to deal with change in different ways. And I've
Absolutely.
had so much change in my life. And, we never lived in, I think we lived in a house for 5 years growing up. And then after
Mhm.
that was every 3 years, always
Yep.
moving. And
Mhm.
it's kind of been a pattern that I've done in my adult life as well.
Yes. Yes.
Just seems to be that cycle comes up where that change
Mhm.
is inevitable. And I would love to kind of be rooted somewhere and settle. But it
Mhm.
just seems to be that my roots go, no,
Yeah.
resistance, leave yourself
Yeah.
free to go somewhere else. And I don't know if it's a conditioning or who I really am, but we don't prepare people for change. It's just like, oh, it's going to be an adventure, it's going to be exciting. But like when I went, this very protected young girl from England over to South Africa and opened up into this radically different world. I didn't navigate it well. And
No,
my mum
and
was,
I,
so busy discovering herself that she kind of left me behind there for a while.
yeah,
And,
mm,
and I walked into a number of things that I would never have walked into before, that
yes,
changed my
yeah.
life. So we don't prepare for that
No,
change.
and I think it's because on one level, change is happening all the time. So it's
Yeah.
like we think, well, I can deal with any change
Yeah.
that comes along my way because I've got experience of dealing with change. However, as you read out in my description there, it's like not all changes are equal.
Yes.
And so personality comes into play. It's like, well, here's a change that totally challenges how I tend to work. I mean, I have a fairly strong introvert preference. And if I go into situations that require me to be extremely social, and are constantly giving out high energy, I
Hmm.
get really drained and I
Yes.
can't deal
Yes.
with it. I can't deal with it for long periods of time. It's not
No.
that I can't be social. It's just that if there's an expectation that I need to be at this level of energy all the time, it's like I don't cope very well.
No.
So, but somebody else who has a strong extrovert preference, they might really thrive in that kind of a context. So it's kind of like knowing yourself is going to be
Yes.
is actually really important in navigating the change, and we don't do that either very
Mm.
well. So it's not just that we don't understand change, but we also don't understand who we are and how
We
change might
adapt to
affect
that.
us
Mm. Yeah.
and how we might respond to change. Like there are some people that they're going to react badly to change no matter what because they like to know things in advance. They like things to be very structured and very, very ordered.
They're very much the box people. Give me the order. I want to know
Yeah.
exactly where everything is filed. Right.
Yes, that kind of stuff. And for those people to be thrown in a situation where it appears to
Mm.
them to be chaos, they struggle with that. And
Yes.
I think that's one of the things that I've realized for myself, and this comes into my practice, is that the transition stuff, it's like you can prepare for transition and know a whole bunch of stuff, and the experience can be completely different
Yeah.
from what you thought you were going into. So just because you know that a change is coming up doesn't necessarily mean that you've prepared for it. And there are some things that you can't prepare for because you don't know what you're going to encounter
Right.
once you get there.
The
So
unknown, right? And that's what most people are always afraid of is the
yeah,
unknown. You
yeah.
know,
And
and a lot of people feel that if you are a person like, as a counselor, this that you could speak articulate, you could be a part of groups, and they think you must be an extrovert. People perceive because of what I do, I'm an extrovert. But I'm the introverted extrovert. The extrovertism comes out when it needs to, and then the introverted comes back in where I'm regrouping, leave me alone.
exactly, exactly. So there's always a balance there, and it's like
Yeah,
life won't let us sit there in the introvert space
yeah,
indefinitely. It's like we have to engage with the world,
yes, the balance again.
but we need to actually know how to do that effectively, so that
Yes.
we're not drained, and that we're maintaining the appropriate level of connection for us. I
Because
just
that's
want to
another form of burnout, isn't it? If you
absolutely.
overexpend that energy, it costs you. There's another form of burnout. And this is when, the emotion and the psyche and the body can start breaking down because you're overextending yourself. Know your own boundaries.
And for me, I know my experience of boundary right there out of university was very much about I thought that I had an inexhaustible supply,
Hmm.
and I wasn't getting chances to recharge. I was in a situation where it basically felt like I was working in an educational context 5 days a week, and then I was spending most of my weekend preparing for the next week. So it's like I
Right.
never left work, and it felt like work was taking over all of my life, and it was sucking the life out of me.
Yes.
And it wasn't until I got sick in the second year that
Hmm.
I was in that context that it was I suddenly realized this is the first time I had 3 days off that I was sick. This is the first time I've been home and I'm not sitting there with a pile of work.
Right.
Something is wrong with the way things are
And that,
going.
that sickness was the nice little cosmic two by four to remind you, redirect
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, so it's this whole thing about preparing. I just want to come back to a comment that you made there about the um, moving interchange. People often present it as like it's a great adventure. It's all this
Hmm.
and it's all that, and putting the positive spin on the change. And that's well and good. I think it's important because we don't want to go. We wouldn't choose a change that we knew was going to be difficult.
Right.
So, I mean, there might be difficulties once we get there, but we're often motivated to go into change because we look at all of the opportunities
Yes.
that change presents. And we also need to recognize that there are two sides to the change experience. So, yes, there's the moving into the new and exciting things, and there's also the letting go of the other things
Yeah.
that are part of where you are now
Hmm.
that are going to stop you engaging with the change. And for me, I mean, I remember this experience when I was preparing to leave the US and come back to Australia. I suddenly had people that were like they'd been on the edges of my social circle, and I kind of knew them, but we weren't particularly close. And suddenly they're having these comments like, "Well, we want to really get to know you now," and I'm sitting there going, "I'm preparing to leave."
Exactly.
And
What
it's
took you
like
so long? Too late.
we haven't built a strong relationship before
Mm,
now. There isn't time, and I'm now going to be over the other side of the world, and how are we going to maintain that?
mm,
So there was this whole interesting little scenario that was playing out for me. I was aware that I was distancing myself because I was preparing to leave, and the people who are the people I was leaving were suddenly feeling like, no, we don't want you to go.
mm. I know that feeling.
The
Yeah.
pull, the pull
Yeah.
that's going on. I'm sitting there going, I was like, I can't give you emotionally anything at this point in time
Mm,
because my job right now is to detach. And I didn't
mm,
have words for that at that particular point in time, but it's just like, I'm detaching. Don't take that personally, but I'm the
mm,
one who's actually going to needing to have all of this energy to reestablish myself in a new context. And I can't afford to sit there and stay attached to where I've just been because that's going to interfere with my ability to adjust
but
in
it's
the new.
also a trust factor in the sense that, just because you're leaving, they don't want you to go and want you to be best buddies. But what about all that time that you were there before?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, how much of this is believable when
Yeah.
I've been here? Oh, I
Yes.
don't want you to go, but yeah, I've been here. Where were you then?
Yes. It's like why is it important to connect now
Mm.
when it wasn't important to connect all these other times when it appeared that I was just part of the furniture?
Kind of like, what you can't have, you want. It's
Mm. Yeah.
it's
And I mean, there were some really difficult conversations that I had to have with people there about like, yeah, I appreciate that you want friendship and you want to deepen stuff thing, and I just don't have it in me to do this right now.
right. I think a
And
lot of people who are very kind of settled in where they are and don't have much change in their lives, don't understand the people that do change. I've been an immigrant twice now to South Africa, to here. I was trying to
mm,
get back into the States and that didn't work. It was 2008 and all that type of stuff going on. And in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't because I would not be good there right now. Be far too outspoken. And Canada's a very good country. Um, but it was there's it was realizing I can't go back to England. I'm
mhm.
a foreigner in England. I'm too
Yes.
far removed from that now, even though I'm perceived as being British here in Canada
Mhm.
or amongst Americans when I'm interviewing them. Um, I am too foreign in that country. South
And I
Africa,
yeah.
I knew I couldn't go back to there because there was just too much that needed to be changed for me to go back there.
Yep.
And so it's kind of that feeling that you've got to make something work where you are because there
Mm.
isn't the other option, right?
Yes, yes, and I totally hear you about feeling foreign. I mean, the US, I've got heritage there.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I fit. I've got
Mm,
two of my siblings are living in the US and they've settled and they're quite happy to be there from by all accounts. But I couldn't make it work for me. It was
hmm
just kind of like this is asking something for me to be here. It's asking me to be somebody that I'm not prepared to
right.
be.
But that's
And
part of life's journey, isn't it? Is that we go to a place and we're kind of trying to fit in. We're trying to make our feels that we can root. But it's really, I feel, we need to root with ourselves first. And, we're
yes,
bringing the whole of ourselves to a place where we then know which vibe matches us, and it's less about the place,
yes.
and more about are you at home with yourself?
Yes, and that was the conclusion that I came to after I did the processing from this TEDx talk about where is home, because it was just like after trying all of these external things to go and
Mm,
make my home, it was like no, it's me that chooses where I'm
yeah,
there, and I bring to wherever I am the person that I am to the degree that
yes,
I want
yeah,
to the degree that I want to. It's like each new place brings something new into my life, but I
yes.
also have things to contribute as well. And that may not be all of my past experience, although it could be. Um, I mean, the past experiences shape me, so in a sense, it's there,
Yes.
but it doesn't have to be overt. And I think for a while there, it was just like, I need people to know. I need people to know all about me. Otherwise, I don't feel like I'm connected. And it's like, well, actually, no. I can bring that out as it's needed, and it's still there in the background, and it's not going away. So I don't feel the pressure to sit there and say, "You need to understand."
Yes.
So,
Yes. I don't know whether it's age or experience or just, kind of doing the work to become at home with self. It's the
mm,
same thing as where you don't need that validation from someone else. You don't
yes,
you don't need all the likes. You don't need
mm,
all the approval from someone else. If it's
yes,
from people that really do know you, that you have a high regard for, you're going to listen to them. But from the
yes,
general chitter-chatter out there, it's just
yep,
chitter-chatter and you're not going to bend yourself into a pretzel for the chitter chatter. It's, the core of you. It's coming
yep,
home to the core of you, and that's the core consciousness of your heart and soul and spirit. You know,
absolutely,
I believe that, when we open up our heart, we can hear our soul wisdom that lifts our spirit into action, and our mind will know what it needs to know when it needs to know it.
mm,
Because I think if people are living just from the chin up, they're always going to be confused. They're always going to be chasing something. They're
mm,
disconnected from the essence of who they are on
yep.
all of the other levels. So how can you be a whole person living a whole life?
Yes. And I say to people periodically, it's like logic is great and logic will only get you so far
Yeah,
because there are lots of things that are logical, but it's not necessarily what you want to do.
no.
Um,
I mean, even
so,
Spock had problems with being logical.
mm, yeah.
It has its
So,
place, but
yes.
you can't live life by that because things aren't black and white. We're not just gray, we're multiple colors. And we're
Yes.
multiple hues, we're multiple shades in life. And that,
And
you know,
and I think the shades vary
yeah,
over time. So it's like who I was when I was in my 20s is not the same as the person that I am now. Like as I'm 50 now, it's like, well, I'm not the same person and I
no,
shouldn't be.
no.
And
And
if
nor should you want to be.
exactly.
That's
So it's
important because those that are still chasing their youth and
mm,
holding on to it is that they haven't come to terms or embracement of themselves. They're chasing
yes.
what maybe when you were popular or when you were this or when you were that, and you're not
And
living with who you are now.
And there's a sense of loss there. People are
Yes.
grieving a youth that they no longer have, and it's like, well, okay, I can't say that I'm one of those. I mean, it's like I look back at my 20s and go, I'm so glad I'm not there anymore.
I am with you. I posted a picture the other day of me actually in front of Table Mountain in a swimsuit, and I know I was in my early 20s, maybe even 2021. And it was, and other people were posting kind of them at that age as well. And it was like, yes, kind of, yeah, give me back that body, give me back those looks. That would be nice, or that health in my perspective. But would I want to be that person again? No, absolutely not. And
No,
there's something beautiful about aging in the wisdom and in the gratification and appreciation for life and what we can give to life and what we can receive.
yes, yes, and I think letting go of some of the messages about who I ought to be or who I
Yes,
should be,
yes.
and embracing the person that I've been created to be, the person that I mean the experience, the wisdom, the knowledge that has developed over time. It's like yes, and I needed to be in my 20s to
Mm,
experience what I did, but I've also moved on. And
exactly.
I'm taking the lessons of those things. I'm taking the gifts of that period of
Hmm.
time and moving into my 30s. I did a number of years ago, I was part of a business networking group. And one of the things that we were asked to do was do a 5-minute presentation periodically over the year. And the last one that I did in that particular context, I realized that I hadn't talked about how I got into business,
Mm,
what had been my journey. And so I thought I'd do that. And in putting together that particular presentation, I realized one of the things that came out of it for me was it just struck me how nothing was wasted. It's like
right.
I sat there and
Right.
my 20s, I started working as a school teacher, burned out, left school teaching for a year and did temp work, gained all of these admin skills, went back to that were useful. Then when I went back into school teaching, started uh, did school teaching, realizing that I could do it, then realized that I'd moved beyond that and needed to
Mm,
leave, and then spent 5 years trying to work out exactly what I needed to do.
yes.
But in those 5 years, I was actually developing a whole bunch of extra skills and
Mm,
experience that then moved me to recognize that the counseling space, it was time to move into that space. And I mean, I'm sort of going through a bit of a transition. I've been in a bit of a transition for the last couple of years as well, where it's just like, okay, the counseling stuff is going well, not as well as I'd like it to be going, but certainly I've learned a lot, and I feel like I'm very competent in my skills as a counselor, and I'm feeling I've moved to go beyond that.
mhm,
Now, the counseling has built on my teaching stuff and used my business is using my admin skills and my counseling skills and my teaching skills.
mhm.
My cross-cultural reflections have come into the play, all of that kind of stuff. It was just like, okay, as I move into look at my next space and where I'm looking to support other therapists to make their businesses successful and to understand the whole business side of running a
Mhm.
practice, um, that's pulling in more skills that, I mean, initially I didn't even realize I had
Right.
around what's the framework for business, what are the main things that we need to be paying attention to and planning for. And yeah, it's just been fascinating sort of looking at like how all the pieces kind of fit together. Because as you're going through it, a lot of times you sit there and go, I don't know what
Am I
sense to
just
make.
flapping in the wind? Yeah, and the
Uh,
traditional is get a job and stay with it. And that was always with me. What was I going to be? Let's hope she has a good marriage because she's uneducated. She'll never amount to anything. Blah blah blah. And it's
100%.
and I've had numerous experiences. I've been a restaurateur, being a model, being an actress, being a counselor, being numerous things along the line. Each and every one of them has taught me something about myself, about skills I have or don't have,
Yep.
things that I'm strong at, things that I'm weak at. And I think
Mm,
nothing is a waste. For me, failure is when you sit on your butt and you don't get back up.
yep.
I just call all of these things that don't work just redirects, and you take what you learn from that and
Yep.
apply it where it will work.
Mm. I read a book called The Art of Possibility by Benjamin Zander, I want to say, and his wife, I can't remember what her name is, and he's an orchestra conductor,
Mm,
and he talks about how do you approach mistakes or how do you approach things that don't go to plan. And he said he's taken this stance of like, throwing his hands up and saying, "Fantastic!
mhm.
What's happening here?"
Yes,
And it's just like
experience it. Yeah.
yeah, and so the whole reframing of like it's not a mistake.
No.
It's like this is something interesting's happening. Let's find out why.
Yeah.
Let's work out what's going on here. This wasn't what we expected. So does it mean that we need to do something different, or do we need to pay attention to something that we had missed? And
Exactly.
that was
100% agree with that.
a lovely way to reframe the whole idea
Yeah.
of when it
That's the
feels
way
like
I've lived my life. It didn't work. Let's try something new. And I have no idea what I can do until I try. You know, when
yes,
when I went into podcasting, I didn't even know what it was when somebody asked me to do it. I was live for 13 months with her network, and you call it the soap opera training because everything can go wrong when it's live. Started
yes,
my own network. I still didn't know what I was doing, but I was learning as I go. This June
yes.
will be 10 years of my own network. April is
Wow.
11 years of podcasting, and I found my niche, my land, my soil, my roots, right, in doing what I'm doing. And I can do it anywhere, so it doesn't matter. It's good lighting, good internet, that's all. And it is,
Yep,
but everything that I'd gone through in life had prepared me to do this job, right?
exactly.
And when I first started it, I had no idea of that. I was literally navigating, just going with the flow. And I think one of the big words that I encourage people to do is allow. Allow yourself to go through an experience without dictation,
Yes.
right? God laughs at all your plans. You can have a blueprint that you're trying to follow, but if it suddenly takes you in a different direction, don't go, no, it's got to go in this direction. This, square peg has to fit into this hole. No, let go of that and allow it to take you where it wants you to go, because you're going to make discoveries that are mind
Mm.
blowing that
Yes.
I never knew I could do that. Oh, I never
Yes.
knew I would enjoy that, or I never knew, what a wonderful experience that I didn't deny myself. And I think that's
Mm.
really important. If we go with the flow sometimes, we can take the structure and the knowledge with us because then
Yes,
we know how to apply what we're learning. But it is
exactly.
please go and experience the experience without holding yourself back because it doesn't look like what you thought it should look like.
And it's interesting as I reflect on my life, it's like I never thought I'd be in this space. I when I got out of university as a new grad teacher, it was like I thought education was going to be my entire life, my entire career, and I just never thought about doing anything else. And so the experience of burnout sort of like
Mm,
totally pulled that rug out from under my
a
feet.
lovely redirect.
And I needed to look at like, well, what do I do if I don't do this?
Yes.
And then it's like, so threw myself into the temp work was great for me because it sort of exposed me to a whole bunch of things. And there
Mm,
were things that, I mean, I was offered jobs from the temping that was like, oh, we want you to do this admin stuff. And I'm sitting there going, I don't want to do admin.
mm,
I can do it. I can do it, and I can do it
yeah.
well. And I understand that I've got the attention to detail and all of that. But honestly, if I had to do this day in, day out for the rest of my career, I'd be bored silly.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I knew that about myself. And I also knew that I needed to go back to teaching to find out if the problem was me or the
Mm,
problem was context or if there was some combination of the two. I needed to resolve that for myself because I had done 4 years of training for that. And I felt I owed it to myself to
you
work
didn't want to
out.
see it wasted.
Yeah, and where I am now, it's like I'm looking at it. It's not been wasted at
No.
all. I've been
Well, you're
able
a
to
different form of teacher now.
absolutely,
You're
absolutely,
the leader and the teacher teaching people to see themselves, to see really
yes.
what their obstacles are and to become one with themselves. So you're still teaching, just in a different
And
format.
and there's lots of insight and information that I can give people to help them to understand themselves
Mm,
better. So it's like that whole component is in there, and it's and even with this stuff that I'm doing with other therapists, there it's just like I'm structuring an online program that therapists can come into where I will give them the space
mm,
to set up and maintain their business in a way that works best for them. It's not this one size fits all type
right.
of thing. Because I mean, no business, everyone runs a business differently. And that comes out of who they are. It comes out of their life experience,
Mm,
their context, the gifts that they bring, the skills that they have and the skills that they don't have. And the self-awareness is hugely
yeah,
important. It's not just about going into, I can be a counselor and I can go and help people with this. It's all the other stuff that goes around
yeah.
that. That a lot of times, I know when I went into private practice, I didn't know that I needed to know.
My daughter
So,
went back to school at 27 to do social work.
mhm,
And then for her practicum, she had to go and work in a different group. And she worked in a group around mental health. And she devised all these programs and activities for people to be re-engaged and, to kind of enjoy things that they're doing, just because some of the severity was quite there. And they immediately offered her a job afterwards, even though she hasn't quite finished her degree. She's got two courses she needs to finish, but she had a baby. And then they said, no, we don't care. It's
mhm,
yours. And then now she's pregnant again. And no, we don't care. When you finish, the
yeah,
job is open for you. But the
nice.
interesting thing is that she's actually having a child, we've just found out, with Down syndrome. And
Mhm,
you know, it it's happening to the right person because she's
mhm,
already got the experience. And she went back to school later after having some life experience and other experience. And so when she was taking the social work, I don't know where I want to be. Children, seniors, this and that. I don't know where I want to be. And then when she landed this, and then she sees the intrigue of the mind and how it works and how minds are trying to come back, or the limitations of certain people that, just them being able to do one thing is hallelujah compared.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
it's happening to the right person because you'll be equipped
yes,
for it. So I don't think
yes.
there is any mistakes in life. Things happen to us. And I think we need to look at it happening for us. What are we to learn from this that can benefit us or help us grow as a human being?
Yes. And I think there's also a recognition too that there are seasons. It's like
Yes.
I know for me, it's like there was a season for me to be in education.
Mm,
And for me, it was very, very clear when that season had come to an end.
Yes.
Like, yeah, and it's funny because I actually ended up having a very clear dream that made it very, very clear that I don't want to be there anymore.
Right.
And so, um, but sometimes we hold on to things past their use by date. And it's like, well, I've committed to doing this, and I'm going to stay the course, and make something of it. I think sometimes we injure ourselves in the process
Mm,
because it's time for us to move on, but we're resisting the movement, and
yeah,
that can be something that we inflict on ourselves without intending to.
right. It goes back to something you said in the beginning about, everybody, leave college, get married, have the kids, follow that route, and it wasn't for you. I have a 40-year-old daughter who's, I call her the Auntie Mame. As soon as the kids are older, they're going to be off at museums and here, art galleries everywhere, right? She wasn't really designed to be a mother. She'll be a fantastic art. Um, and my youngest daughter is the one with the babies, and my son now has a relationship with there's a stepdaughter. Um, and it's like my daughter kind of at one point, should I have children? And I said, no, not if you're saying should I, and not like I want to. And for me, I always knew I wanted to be a mother. That was something that was very important to me. But if it's like, should I? If you're asking that question, then
Mm,
no. And it reminds me of the movie Mr. Chips, where Mr. Chips, the professor, asks his
mm,
wife, you never had children, do you regret it? And she said, I had thousands of them. They're all boys, because
mm.
they ran a
Boredom.
boarding school. And it's like, as a teacher, you have many kids, you have an enormous amount of influence on those children. And it's like not everybody is meant to be the organic parent. We can parent in so many other ways.
Mm. Yes. And that's again some lovely reframes there around like the pathway that we choose is our pathway. We don't.
Yeah,
I mean, I got married when I was 40, so it's like coming up to a 10-year anniversary of this, which is kind of cool. Um, and it was one of the things that my wife and I discussed before we got married. It was just like, well, we're older. We don't know whether we will have children or not. We want them, but we don't know if we're going to have them. And we were getting friends of ours who were it was like giving us horror stories about lots of things. And it was just like one of the things I kept saying to my wife is like, um, that's their story. It doesn't have to
yeah,
be ours.
exactly.
And whatever it was that they were trying to warn us about
Yeah.
or make us prepare for was actually unhelpful,
Mm,
and we didn't have to take it on board, so we
yeah.
just didn't. And yeah, and that's just a something that I keep coming back to. It's like the story that I'm living is my story. It's not
Yes.
anybody else's story. It interfaces with other people's story, but it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be the same as theirs.
And I think the important thing in a relationship, you have your story, she has her story, and you have the collective story. And
Yes.
this is, one of the things that happens in relationships. People give themselves over and lose themselves. You
Mm.
fell in love with the individual, and it's
Yes.
how does that individual make you feel as a collective? And you never
Yep.
want to lose your own identity. You want to bring the strength and the beauty of that identity into the collective and merge them together without losing yourself. So basically,
Yes.
there's three relationships going on: his, hers,
Absolutely.
theirs. And that's
Absolutely.
important to
Yes.
have, because if you just go in the merge, you lose yourself and then you become
Absolutely.
resentful. And then they go, well, you're not the same person I married. No, you're not. And you
No.
never will be. And it's like you want to know that you can grow together, but without losing yourselves, right?
Mhm. Yes, yes. So that's a big learning for a lot of relationships, and I
Mm,
think sometimes if people go into relationships recognizing that they will change and
mm,
that they it is important to maintain a sense of who they are and to be differentiated enough but still be connected. Um, yeah, it's crucial to a healthy relationship.
yeah. And a lot of people are marrying later nowadays, and whether they have children or not have children, it's okay. So many people are having kids in their 30s now. That God, I wouldn't have wanted them in my 20s. I wasn't ready. And
Mm.
it's there is no wrong or right way. It's what way you're ready for.
Yeah. Mm.
right? Where you
Absolutely.
know that whether it's a career, whether it's children, whether it's marriage, whether it's moving to another country, what are you ready for?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've all got to do that work, haven't we? We can't escape.
Absolutely. And the readiness, as I said, there are seasons and the readiness is there as we're going on. I remember when I made the decision to leave Australia, that yes, there were mixed motives to that. Yes, I was ready to leave, but I was also looking at, I've got a fork in the road. I could stay where I am and put down roots and get established in teaching career at that particular point in time. Or I could take this opportunity to do a working holiday over in the UK and see what comes of that.
Hmm.
It's like, I'm not ready to settle. It's like
Yes, exactly. A
there's more of
nice
the world.
experience, thank you, but no routing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and it's funny now. I feel like I'm more established where I am now than I have been for my entire life,
Hmm.
and it's not the place that I would have expected to be. But this is right. This is where I need to be right now,
Well,
and
I've
I will.
become the traveling grandma, so I've got no roots. My
Yeah,
daughter has the main house that everybody goes to. And
yeah,
because everybody is rooted with their own business, their own life, I'm the one that goes to them.
yep,
So,
mhm,
it's I'm the traveling grandma. So
yep,
I don't know if I'll ever kind of be rooted again. It'd be nice, but it will be what it will be, right? But I think also we need to be able to paint the canvas of our desire.
mm,
Right? If we can't paint that canvas of how we want to feel, it's not what you think you want or what you need. The house, car, this, that, etc. How do you want to feel? Paint
mm,
your feeling out there. What will make you feel happy? And then allow that universe to guide you along the way and pay goddamn attention.
mm.
Because it will always get given to you, but half the time we're, la 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 la, we're not seeing it.
Yeah.
Right. So
Or we are so fixated on this is what it has to be that we miss
yes.
all other things
Yes.
that
Yeah.
could
We're
be
not
happening.
allowing. We're not allowing. Yeah. I always say, that we need to listen, learn, and apply. And if we're not
Absolutely.
listening, we're not learning, and we have nothing to apply. So, it does start with us. We are our own responsibility. We are our own ownership. Whatever's happened to you has happened to you. When you decide to make it happen for you, discover your courage, your strength, and your abilities, and who you're meant to be because of this experience, then you
Yeah.
understand what has happened for you. But, we can blame everybody else out there in the world. But, as one thing is pointing out, three are pointing back, is still what are you going to do about it? So we
Yeah.
have to take ownership. And if we need the help like you along the way, to do that, to just to make sense of how we're feeling and to understand what to let go of and what's okay, that is perfectly okay and what we need to do so that we
Mm,
can become whole in who we are, because it's in that wholeness we bring our truth, we bring our
mm,
essence, we bring our solution, and we don't create more problems in the world.
mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Preach it, sister.
Yeah, we don't need any more dysfunction, folks. There's plenty of that out there. And we've got to
Right.
realize we do own how we feel. We need to understand why we feel that way. And so many times, I'm sure you've seen this, where somebody has that epiphany of, I feel like that. Why? I should have let that go a long time ago.
Mm.
Right? So
Yep.
we've got to be willing to do the work, because if we're not
Absolutely.
going to find ourselves, and it's ourselves that you need to be at home with. So,
Absolutely.
having said that, you've got the courses where you help other people, with their own business, but you also have your own, counseling. I know you don't have a site right now, it's LinkedIn and Facebook, but what are you offering and how do people get hold of you for that?
Okay. Well, what I'm offering first of all is like if you're interested in the counseling process or in a process that I call reflective practice, which is a little bit more of a how do I just define the difference? Reflective practice is the first step before going into counseling.
Hmm.
So it's like giving you a chance to regularly check in with yourselves and build up your understanding of yourself. So reflective practice or counseling, I do a free inquiry call that can be a Zoom call or a phone call, depending upon where in the world you are, and to just kind of get a sense of like, is this what I need to do, and from that you'll get some information about how the process works and about how I work and the details that go on here. If you wanted to then take it further, you just book in an initial assessment session where we have a trial appointment. It's a 90-minute appointment where you're checking me out, I'm checking you out. We're trying
Hmm.
to work it out. Can we work together? And if we do work together, what are we going to be working on? And and then we take it from there. So the link is on my Facebook page, and I'm pretty sure that it's also my LinkedIn page. But you can send me a message if you're connected to me on LinkedIn, or and my email address. I think I'm leaving that with Sarah as well. If you wanted to email me with your interest about following up on any of that, that would be perfectly acceptable as well.
You've also got go.oncehub.com/service inquiries.
That's for the free call. So
Okay,
that's
so
15
people
15
can
call.
reach out to that one to book a call,
And
of course.
yep, and that will connect with my calendar. You can find a space that suits you. And if you're basically, there'll be a Zoom link that will be provided with the booking confirmation for those people who need it. And for those who would prefer a phone call, there's an option to tick the phone call and I'll call you.
And under your LinkedIn, it's under your name, Neville, Neville, Starick, Starick, Sail to a Brighter Future. And under your Facebook, your, I know I'm pronouncing this wrong,
Cynosure.
so that's CynosuresUpport. And of course, all they have to do is just put in your name here into selfdiscoverymedia.com and your whole show page comes up with all the links and obviously all the ways they can listen to the show as well. It's more and more people are realizing they need help. It used to be a kind of a stigma if you went to a counselor, that there had to be something wrong with you. And more we're realizing with the bombardment of life, bombardment of expectations, of social media, of confusion, and just the sheer negative energy out there that's affecting people, that they do need the help and the guidance to navigate through it. What really is something that belongs to them? What do they need to let go of? How do they need to reframe their lives and embrace who they really are? Because most of the time I find people are selling themselves short by living up to somebody else's expectation rather than really living up to who they really are.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yes, and sifting through what are the expectations that are coming from the outside versus what are the desires of my heart and what are the
Mm,
things that are authentic to me is a process,
yes,
and it's an ongoing, lifelong process. So, and not to say that counseling or reflective practice needs to be lifelong access, but it can actually give you the tools to then continue and carry on.
exactly.
Um,
The tools you put in your backpack to travel forward with life. But, again, it goes back to if we're not participating in our own life, we're abstaining, which means anybody can dictate anything that goes on, whether you like it or not. So that ownership of ourselves, the willing to participate, the willing to really look at our lives without blame, without shame, just trying to understand why you feel that way, letting go of things, embracing other things, and just but willing to go through the process. And the more when people are willing to go through the process, the more they're going to find themselves, their meaningful purpose, and their direction in life, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thanks so much for being with us here today, Neville. We've learned a lot from you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Really appreciate it, Sarah.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. We need more people out there like you, and more people need to understand they need people like you. We're not meant to do this alone. We used to have a support of a village. We don't anymore. Everything has become so insular and isolated, and we need to get back to understanding that we need the wise one to help us through the path of life, so we can understand what our path is. So until next time, folks, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show. Find all of our shows on selfdiscoverymedia.com under podcasts or selfdiscoverymedia/shows. And for all our current shows, go to What's New. We are supported by you, the audience. You'll see a nice big shiny blue button for one-time donations or follow us on Patreon and you will be able to support us there. We enjoy bringing you such wisdom. And the next show will be up in just a moment.